The night was unusually still over the quiet outskirts of Millfield, a small town known more for its close-knit community than for any hint of danger. Under the pallid glow of streetlights, a ragtag crew of masked figures crept along the cobblestone lane leading to St. Michael's Church. Their whispers and furtive glances carried a dangerous promise. A heist was about to unfold. "What would you do in this situation?" boomed a gravelly voice from one of the gang's speakers as they huddled near the heavy wooden doors. "Comment where you're watching from and subscribe for more." Their leader, known only as Razor, exuded a reckless confidence that masked the true nature of their plan. The target was simple, a centuries-old church rumored to be nearly abandoned. What they didn't know, however, was that St. Michael's was not empty tonight. Inside the church, a flicker of candlelight danced along stained glass windows and carved pews. The congregation had long dispersed for the evening service, leaving behind only the dedicated souls who had once served their country. Unbeknownst to Razor and his crew, the sanctuary had become a haven for Army veterans, a motley band of retired soldiers who met regularly to share stories of valor and to find solace in each other's company. Their weathered faces and quiet determination belied a readiness for any threat. The gang, armed to the teeth and driven by a misguided thrill, smashed the church's side door with a heavy crowbar, the echo of shattering wood mixed with the pounding of their hearts. "This is it," Razor hissed as they surged into the nave, their flashlights sweeping over ancient relics and the rows of empty pews. The adrenaline was palpable, but so was an eerie calm that hung in the air, as if the very walls were watching. Suddenly, from the back of the church, voices rose, not in prayer, but in measured tones that spoke of decades of military discipline. "Freeze! Hands up!" A deep, commanding shout cut through the chaos. The gang members froze mid-step, startled to see several figures emerging from shadowed alcoves. These weren't frightened congregants. They were resolute veterans, their eyes sharp and movements precise, as if they were reliving missions from a time when the stakes were life and death. Razor's bravado wavered as he peered into the candlelit faces of men and women who had seen more battle than his crew could ever imagine. "Who are you?" one of the gang members demanded, his voice quivering between defiance and fear. "Oh," veteran in a faded military jacket stepped forward. "We served our country, and we're not about to let you desecrate this sacred ground," he declared. His tone was calm, yet it carried the weight of years of hard-won experience. The realization hit Razor and his crew like a sledgehammer. They had underestimated not only the sanctity of the place, but also the steely resolve of those within. Before anyone could react further, a low hum of engines and distant sirens began to rise outside. The tension in the church became almost unbearable. And then, from the far end of the aisle, a shadow detached itself from the darkness. A tall, lean figure, with a face partially obscured by a worn cap. The newcomer's eyes glinted with a secret knowledge, and his presence was as unsettling as it was magnetic. The veterans exchanged wary glances, and Razor's crew instinctively retreated a few paces. The figure moved slowly, deliberately toward Razor, his gaze never wavering. "You think you know the score," he murmured in a tone that was half warning, half promise of what was to come. "There's more at stake here than money or mischief." In that charged moment, every second felt magnified. The armed gang's plan had spiraled out of control, and the peaceful sanctuary had become a battleground where the past and present collided. Every eye in the church was fixed on the shadowy figure who seemed to hold the key to the unfolding mystery. Just as Razor's trembling hand hovered over his weapon, the mysterious figure stopped at the very edge of the light and whispered, "You're about to learn that some treasures aren't meant to be stolen." In that instant, a deafening sound from outside, the unmistakable roar of approaching sirens, drowned out his words. Who is this enigmatic stranger? And what dark secret does he hold that could change everything? In the aftermath of the initial shock, the sacred silence of St. Michael's was shattered by a cacophony of voices and clanging metal. The veterans, once peaceful and contemplative, now moved with the precision of a well-drilled unit. Their collective history, forged in the heat of conflict, imbued them with an unyielding determination to protect their sanctuary. Meanwhile, Razor and his gang, their earlier bravado replaced by panic, scrambled for cover behind pews and statues. The enigmatic figure from the aisle, now revealed as Sergeant Collins, a decorated veteran with decades of experience, stepped forward with a steely gaze. "You boys really thought you could waltz in here and get away with it, didn't you?" he said, his tone both scolding and sorrowful. "There's more to this place than you ever imagined." As the chaos unfolded, the veterans began to recount snippets of their past. One by one, they revealed how St. Michael's had become their second home, a refuge where they could keep the lessons of their military service alive. There was Captain Ramirez, who had led a battalion in a forgotten war, Lieutenant Harper, whose quiet determination had saved countless lives, and Corporal Jenkins, whose humor and bravery had brightened even the darkest days. Their stories, filled with both pride and pain, underscored a lifetime of sacrifice and duty. For Razor and his crew, each passing second brought a stark realization. They were not just robbing a building, they were defiling a sanctuary steeped in honor. The veterans' calm resolve in the face of danger was as unnerving as it was inspiring. Razor's heart pounded in his chest as he witnessed the transformation of a simple church into a fortress of valor. But just when a fragile sense of order seemed to be reestablishing itself, when the veterans began rounding up the would-be robbers and calling for backup, a sudden twist sent shockwaves through the congregation. From the far end of the church, the heavy doors burst open once again. In strode a new group, their silhouettes defined by armed resolve and determined expressions. These were not ordinary civilians. They were a contingent of active-duty military. Police alerted by the ringing sirens and the unmistakable scent of impending violence. The veterans exchanged glances with Sergeant Collins, acknowledging the reinforcements with nods of relief and anticipation. Yet, the arrival of the military police wasn't the end of the surprises. As the officers began taking control of the situation, one of them, a young lieutenant with a scar running down his cheek, caught Razor's eye. In that brief moment, it became clear that this lieutenant carried a personal vendetta, a shadow of a past encounter that might explain why he was so determined to see the criminals brought to justice. Inside the church, emotions ran high. The gang members' desperate attempts to negotiate with the veterans were met with steely silence and steeper resolve. "You've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed," Captain Ramirez intoned, his voice resonating with authority and regret. "There's honor in every bullet fired tonight, and each of you will answer for your actions." As tensions escalated, an unseen adversary lurked in the background. Hidden among the flickering candles and ancient murals was a figure cloaked in shadow, someone whose presence had gone unnoticed until now. This person's eyes burned with a quiet intensity, and every step they took was measured, as if they were preparing for a moment of reckoning that would shatter the tenuous calm. Just when hope for a peaceful resolution seemed possible, the hidden figure stepped forward into the light, revealing a chilling secret, a weapon in hand, and a declaration that would upend every plan in place. "If you think this ends here, you're gravely mistaken," the figure growled. "Who is this unknown adversary, and how will his unexpected entrance shatter the fragile alliances forged in the sanctuary?" In the dim glow of the church's ancient, stained glass, the sanctuary had transformed into a crucible of betrayal and defiance. The appearance of the armed figure, the traitor among them, was a turning point from which there was no retreat. The atmosphere was thick with tension, as both veterans and robbers alike braced for a conflict that would redefine loyalties and test the limits of honor. Sergeant Collins, still standing resolute amidst the confusion, bellowed, "We stand together or fall divided." His voice reverberated off the stone walls as the mysterious assailant aimed his weapon at an unarmed veteran. The betrayal was not just in the act, it was in the shock that spread across faces that had once believed in the sanctity of brotherhood. It turned out that the stranger was not an outsider at all. He was Private Doyle, once a promising soldier whose disillusionment with military bureaucracy had driven him to the fringes. Unknown to the veterans, Doyle had harbored a bitter grudge that festered over years, a secret that now exploded in violence. "You all think you're heroes, but you left me behind," he screamed, his voice echoing with raw anguish and betrayal. His defiant act shattered the tenuous truce that had begun to form. The veteran's eyes widened in disbelief, and even Razor's ragged crew, now cowering in fear, sensed that nothing would ever be the same again. In that fateful moment, allegiances shifted like sand. The military police, caught off guard by Doyle's betrayal, hesitated. Their disciplined formation wavered, and chaos threatened to consume the church entirely. As the sound of clashing voices filled the sacred space, each veteran struggled with the bitter taste of disillusionment. Memories of camaraderie and shared sacrifice collided with the reality of personal vendettas, and a darkness crept into the hearts of those who had once fought side by side. Amid the turmoil, Sergeant Collins fought to regain control. "We must not let one man's betrayal undo everything we've built," he cried, rallying his comrades as they attempted to restrain Doyle. But as the confrontation escalated, a heavy silence fell over the assembly. The once steadfast bonds of loyalty were splintering, and every second brought an uncertainty that none had ever imagined. Outside, the wail of sirens mingled with the murmurs of an approaching storm. In a desperate bid to restore order, Captain Ramirez ordered a strategic withdrawal of some of his forces to regroup. However, the fallout was swift and brutal. As the veterans began to gather, one of their closest allies, a young nurse who had tended to their wounds in countless skirmishes, turned away, her eyes filled with tears of regret and anger. Her secret support for Doyle, fueled by long-simmering discontent over unhealed wounds and broken promises, became apparent in one decisive moment. "Why?" whispered Lieutenant Harper, voice trembling as he confronted the nurse. "After everything we've done, why betray us now?" But before any answer could be given, the nurse backed away, disappearing into the shadows of the nave. As the dust of betrayal settled and the veterans struggled to reassemble their fractured unity, a deafening explosion shook the very foundations of St. Michael's. The ground trembled as if echoing the shattering of old alliances. In the midst of the chaos, Razor found himself face to face with a familiar face, one he had once trusted implicitly. You turned against us?" he gasped in disbelief. At this pivotal moment, as the closest ally reveals their darkest secret, how will the tides of loyalty and vengeance reshape the fate of the sanctuary? With betrayal seared into their hearts and the sanctity of St. Michael's hanging by a thread, the veterans had no choice but to transform their grief into decisive action. The turning tide was now in their hands, and with it came a determination to reclaim honor and restore justice to the very place that had once given them solace. No longer were they simply guardians of a sacred space. They were warriors ready to exact payback on every soul that had wronged them. Sergeant Collins, still reeling from the sting of betrayal, rallied the remaining loyalists. "We are not defined by the treachery of a few," he declared, his voice resolute and unwavering. "Tonight, we take back what's ours. We fight not just for this church, but for every sacrifice made in the name of honor." The veterans, their eyes aflame with renewed purpose, gathered their courage like armor. Every scar, every battle fought, was now a badge of defiance against the forces of treachery. In a series of daring maneuvers, the veterans shifted from defensive stances to proactive assaults. Under the cover of darkness, they launched a calculated counterattack against the remaining armed gang members who still lurked in the pews and behind shattered altars. Razor's crew, caught off guard by the sudden surge of relentless discipline, began to crumble. The veterans moved with the precision of a well-drilled unit, each strike a testament to years of military training and the burning desire for retribution. For a brief moment, the church resounded with the victorious cry of the loyalists as they drove the gang members into a disorganized retreat. The first major blow had been struck, a false victory that filled hearts with a flicker of hope. Yet, amidst the triumph, a revelation surfaced that threatened to shatter the delicate peace they had fought so hard to reclaim. Hidden behind a shattered stained glass window, Sergeant Collins discovered a confidential envelope sealed with the insignia of a long-forgotten military operation. The documents inside hinted at a conspiracy that reached far beyond a simple robbery, a network of corruption and betrayal that had infected even the highest ranks. As Collins read the damning evidence, the atmosphere in the church grew tense with the weight of this new knowledge. The revelation was as intoxicating as it was dangerous. Within the very heart of their ranks lay a traitor whose betrayal was not just personal, but part of a larger scheme. The discovery threatened to either serve as their salvation, a way to dismantle the network once and for all, or become the catalyst for their undoing. Every veteran's heart pounded with the realization that the battle was far from over, and the true enemy might still be lurking in the shadows. In the midst of this internal reckoning, the tide of the external battle surged on. Razor, realizing that his crew was disintegrating, attempted one last desperate push to regain control. He darted through the sanctuary, his eyes wild with fear and anger, only to find himself cornered by a coalition of veterans whose resolve was now unbreakable. In that charged moment, the church transformed into a battlefield where honor clashed with desperation, and every moment teetered on the edge of irreversible change. Just as the veterans prepared to apprehend Razor and his remaining cronies, the confidential documents slipped from Sergeant Collins's trembling hands. They fluttered to the ground, landing near the feet of a hooded figure whose identity was hidden beneath a tattered cloak. The figure bent down slowly to retrieve the envelope, eyes glinting with ambiguous intent. "This changes everything," he murmured softly, almost to himself. Is this mysterious figure the key to exposing the true enemy? Or the very force that will undo all that the veterans have fought to preserve? Dawn broke over St. Michael's with a fragile promise of redemption as the final confrontation loomed large. The church, scarred by violence yet hallowed by the sacrifices of its defenders, had become the arena for a showdown that would determine the fate of honor and justice in Millfield. Every veteran, every fallen comrade, and every act of betrayal had led to this singular moment, a reckoning where the past and present collided with explosive force. Sergeant Collins, now hardened by both loss and determination, stood at the forefront of the assembled veterans and newly arrived military. "Reinforcements. Today, we settle every score," he declared, his voice echoing through the silent, battered sanctuary. "There will be no more running, no more hiding. Justice will be served, for the dead, for the living, and for the honor of this sacred place." On the other side of the battered nave, Razor and the remnants of his gang huddled together, their faces a blend of defiance and desperation. They had underestimated the true strength of their adversaries, and now, facing an unyielding force of discipline and valor, their final stand loomed before them like an inevitable reckoning. In the ensuing moments, the church transformed into a war zone. The veterans, fueled by years of unspoken resolve and a burning desire to restore dignity to their sanctuary, advanced in a coordinated assault. Explosions of flashlights, the crack of defiant commands, and the steady rhythm of disciplined steps filled the air, as every combatant fought not just for survival, but for the honor of a lifetime. Amid the chaos, the hooded figure from the previous night reappeared. With a calm that defied the surrounding bedlam, he stepped forward to confront the traitor within, a man whose identity had been obscured until now by betrayal and bitterness. In a final, climactic duel, the figure exposed the hidden truth. The corruption that had festered in the shadows was not merely an act of individual treachery, but a systematic rot that had infected even the highest echelons of power. The revelation was as devastating as it was liberating. Every piece of evidence, every bitter memory, now converged in a single moment that demanded resolution. The final face-off was a spectacle of both physical prowess and moral clarity. Razor's desperate shouts were drowned out by the resolute commands of Sergeant Collins, and one by one the gang's resistance crumbled under the unyielding assault of justice. As Razor fell to his knees, the sound of clanging metal and anguished cries echoed in the hollow space of the once peaceful church. In that moment, it seemed that justice had finally triumphed over chaos. Yet, as the dust settled and the veterans gathered to tend to their wounded and honor the fallen, a lingering uncertainty hovered in the air. The hooded figure approached Sergeant Collins and quietly passed him the recovered envelope, the same document that had hinted at the deeper conspiracy. With trembling hands, Collins read the final lines, and his eyes widened in disbelief. The documents revealed that the network of betrayal extended far beyond Millfield. It was part of a much larger operation that could topple the foundations of power across the region. In the aftermath of the confrontation, as order slowly returned to the battered church, the survivors began to grasp the full weight of their victory. Lives had been forever altered, and the scars of betrayal would remain as a reminder of the high cost of justice. Yet, in the wake of the chaos, there was also a call to rebuild, a call to restore honor, not just within the church, but in every corner of a community that had been ravaged by greed and deceit. Sergeant Collins stood before the assembled veterans and the few remaining gang members who had been taken into custody. "What would you have done?" he asked, his voice carrying the gravity of every sacrifice made on that night. Comment below, share your thoughts, and let this be a reminder that even in our darkest hours, justice can prevail. His eyes, though weary, burned with the promise of a new dawn, a dawn that held the possibility of redemption and the strength to rise above the past. Yet, even as the veterans began the long process of healing and the community looked forward to a future free of corruption, a final enigmatic whisper from the shadows left everyone questioning. Was this truly the end of the conspiracy, or merely the opening act of an even greater struggle? As the sun climbed higher and cast long, uncertain shadows across the rebuilt altar, a solitary envelope fluttered down onto the steps of St. Michael's. Its seal bore the unmistakable mark of the very network the veterans had fought to expose. "This is only the beginning," read the inscription in bold, ominous letters. The story may be over, but is it really? What happens next? Let us know in the comments.